Awesome, and welcome back to the Mid-Atlantic Podcast Conference podcast, because one podcast is not enough inside of our name. I'm Joe Pardo, founder of the Mid-Atlantic Podcast Conference, and today I'm joined by Jon. How do you say your name? Is it Schwabish?
Schwabish. It's like Charles Schwab, but not quite.
But ish, kind of.
Right, exactly.
Jon, thank you so much for joining me this morning. It's great to have you on, and you were an attendee at Mid-Atlantic Podcast Conference 2016.
Sure was. Thanks for having me on, Joe. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here. I was there. Was like a few weeks ago now. It was late September. So yeah, it was great. My first time attending any podcasting conference. So it was super interesting. It was also kind of interesting because, as I guess you sort of find out with any conference, there's like a community of people doing something, and they're all really engaged in it. And I kind of have my own communities of research and data viz and presentation skills, and I'm sort of sitting there going, oh, this is another really cool community to sort of try to get engaged with. So it was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's only so many podcast conferences out there, like specifically to podcasting, and because there are content creation camps and stuff like that across the land. But it's one of the things that I really love focusing on is podcasting, because it is such a in-depth thing. I mean, anybody could say, "Oh, well, just turn on your microphone on your phone and you're podcasting." But even just hosting, even just creating that content, and the amount of work that goes into, because it's not really just podcasting. It's podcasting plus blogging plus social media plus basically running a whole business on this thing that is a great marketing tool. So why don't you go in about what your podcast is all about?
Yeah. So my podcast is called the Policy Viz podcast. Policy Viz is my little consulting firm where I help people and organizations work with their data, give better presentations, basically how to communicate data in better ways. So the podcast, my episodes are about 20, 25 minutes. And I talk with people who are working in the fields of data visualization and presentation skills and presentation coaching, people who are working on open data platforms. So I talk to a lot of sort of data journalists, tend to make a big chunk of my interview base, but also people who are developing new, say, JavaScript libraries, or are just creating cool things. It's funny. It's funny the way you sort of couch the podcasting thing. Like it is not easy. Right? I mean, it is easy in some ways, where it's like, in some ways you're just sort of recording. But like, if you really want to get it going somewhere, it's not easy to, set up the content and get someone to interview if you're that sort of podcasting. If you got to get the social media and the website and the blog and all that sort of stuff. But I actually sort of refer to my podcasting approach as lazy man's blogging, because I try to find people that I just think are interesting, that are doing interesting and cool work, and just talk to them about it. I also try to find people who are not necessarily sort of the leaders I do try to talk to leaders in the field, but also just people who are on the ground. So if any of the listeners out there are interested in data visualization, they probably have heard the names of like Edward Tufte and Alberto Cairo and Andy Kirk and those sorts of people. And I've had those people on my show. But I also talk to the folks who are, they're not, maybe they haven't written books that are bestsellers, and they're not, at huge universities, or they're not necessarily famous, but they're doing really great, interesting work. And so I talk to the Nadia Bremers and the Jim Vallandighams and the Irene Rosses of the world, who are, working with data and making cool things and building great platforms. And so it's an opportunity for me, I think, to learn about what people are actually doing on the ground, but also for listeners to hear about, what does it take to create something that's really good and opens data and helps people see the world in different ways. So the podcast is really just sort of talking to people who are all about communicating data and trying to help people improve how they, analyze data, process data, and visualize it, and ultimately communicate it. Yeah.
Now, how long have you been podcasting for?
So this podcast has been going on for about a year and a half. Um, I had another podcast, actually started a podcast with a friend of mine that went on for about a year, but um, it it was a longer podcast. There were two of us sort of interviewing people, so you added sort of the added piece of getting scheduling, and that was sort of more difficult. So that podcast ran for about a year, and about halfway through that podcast, as we were doing it, I sort of thought, ooh, I really want to sort of try my own thing. And so that podcast we ended up closing down, and so this podcast is now my 60th episode, just sort of started. So yeah, 60th episode went up last week, and I'm all set, sort of interviewing people ongoing for the rest of the year.
Oh wow, that's great, because I love being able to batch record my stuff, so that we don't like through the November and December I'm not like trying to record, and even if I can try to get January and even February out of the way, just so that like I can take some time off, and it's actually those are really good times to get work done. So it really definitely is helpful. So what would you say podcasting means to you?
I mean, like I said, it is part of it is lazy man's blogging, but for me, I really like the idea of letting people talk about their work. So one of the things that I try to do a lot when I'm interviewing someone is I try not to talk too much. I try to ask the question and let someone just spin and talk about their content. So for me, what podcasting really is, like I said, I'm trying to get people who are doing the hardcore work and creating interesting content. And so I'm really just trying to give them a platform to talk a little bit more about the work itself, about what it means to them, about why it's important to them, and why they think it can help people better understand the world, or better understand a topic, or convince people of some idea, or make discoveries, or whatever it is. So for me, it's a different type of communication than a blog post, or even a visualization online where someone can go in and toy around. It's really sort of more of that human connection with the creator, as it were. People like stories. People connect with stories, and so when you actually talk to someone, you might see something online that you're like, oh, this is a great tool, or a great platform, or a great project, or whatever it is. And I think we all kind of want to see what the behind the scene story is behind that. And I think giving people an opportunity to talk about, what they were thinking about when they dove into some project, what the challenges they had. I think everybody has, I don't know, I find a lot of people sort of think like, ooh, I saw this great thing on the New York Times. The New York Times is so great, and they must have just and just made it. And, there's a lot of work that goes in behind it. And for even people who are just sort of starting out, to hear from professionals and people who are doing a great job of like, this is what it took for us to make this thing. Like it took, 5 people working over the course of a week to build this, and we had to build this new library of this JavaScript thing to do this. I think that's really helpful for people to hear the challenges and how they can sort of develop their own skills or develop their own methods going forward. So for me, it's really about helping people either learn or improve how to work with data, how to communicate data.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the internet, as far as like, people taking like a week with 5 people to do something, and it's the internet's such a black hole where it's like, oh, you throw it in, and it's like and that's it.
Just there.
Like and it's people are like, okay, that's great. What else you got?
Right.
And it's like, but you don't understand. Like it took a week to do this with 40 man hours times 5.
Right.
200 man hours in a week to do this.
Yeah,
this one article, or this one piece of research, or this one set of data, and it's like, well, yeah, it's great. What else?
Right. And and the other thing that's funny is when you have people who are not familiar with those other skill sets. So they may say something like, I get people who say to me, ooh, I wrote this report. We have this thing. We want to make it an interactive data tool online. Can you, get this done by the end of the day? And you're like, well, no. This stuff is hard to do. Like, you don't just like click a button and it's made. Like, you have to design it and develop it, and there's all these ins and outs, and you have to think about the user experience, and so I think a lot of people who aren't sort of familiar with what it takes to build some of these things, what it takes to work in JavaScript, or what it takes to know design. They think it's sort of easy. So I always find that interesting when we all sort of get within our own little world of our skills, of what we do well and the people that we work with, and then you say, I want to do this other thing, and you sort of start looking at other fields, and I don't think that appreciation is always there for how hard some of these things are. Like podcasting is a good example of what you just said. Like, to do a really good podcast that a lot of people will listen to, or even the right people will listen to. Maybe not even, it's not necessarily quantity of people, it's quality of people, right?
Right.
But to get those people, like, you don't just sit down and record with, a lousy mic out in the middle of the street somewhere. Like, you have to set it up and think about it, and and then learn what it takes to edit the audio and post it. All this stuff takes time and skill and effort. It's not that you can't learn it. I mean, anyone can learn it, but there's an appreciation for these other skill sets that I think we in general sort of just forget how hard a lot of these skills are to learn and master over time. So,
well, yeah, because it doesn't even end there. Building a website, or at least putting one together through like a Squarespace, or even just finding out about a Podbean or a Libsyn or a Blueberry, that just finding out about that stuff to like host the stuff, and then figuring out how to upload it to it, and then figuring out how to get the word out about it through social media. Like, it doesn't end at just like, oh, I recorded this, it sounds great. Okay, but if nobody ever hears it, then what is it really got to go? It's got to go for somewhere from there. So, and that's one of the things. Like, it's crazy that people love to throw around that whole jack of all trades, master of none thing. But like, just saying like, oh, I'm a podcaster isn't enough, unless, because it used to be like, oh, well, I'm a professional broadcaster.
Right.
And that's all you have to do. Like, you just have to show up and know how to rock a mic. And that's it. And you don't have to worry about sharing it because you have a team for that. You don't have to worry about marketing because there's a team for that.
You're just the broadcaster.
Yeah, you're just the person on the mic and the personality. And it's changing so rapidly for so many people because we're able to come in and do these shows, and yeah, sure, they might not be professional level or grade or whatever, but in my opinion, you only got to get your audio quality to about 80%, and then your content will carry it the rest of the way. Yeah, and that's really what's the most important thing is your content. So and again, audio quality is important, but it only has to get you only have to get to like 80%, 70%, and people will be like, okay, this doesn't hurt my ears aren't bleeding every time I listen to this show. And you can go from there.
But so it's still interesting content, and I'm willing to go through the the crackle here and there, but I'm learning something from this really interesting show. I think it was also interesting having attended the conference, things that I hadn't even really thought about, like the last speaker of the day, whose name I'm forgetting,
Jessica Kupferman.
Yeah, was talking about marketing. Now, I have a couple of sponsors for my show, but it's always been sort of casual, and I tend to know the people who either are running these companies, or they know the people who run the companies, and so they might call me and say, hey, are you doing sponsors? But listening to her talk about build yourself a pitch deck, build yourself a strategy for what you want sponsors to do. So it's not so much just like a random email to someone to be like, hey Joe, do you want to sponsor my podcast? But it's more of a, hey Joe, here's my podcast, here's my listening base, here's what I do, here's my goals, and here's a PDF document that has some stats and has our goals and has different types of packages that we can talk about. There are a lot of those sorts of things that I hadn't really thought that hard about, because I'm at the sort of stage of get a guest, record it, edit it, and all, just get it out there, right? But all these other sorts of things of developing not just the audience but also the support so that you can do more with it, I think was for me was super valuable. So yeah, it is, you like you said, it is not interesting, and there's so many different elements of it, so many elements from the recording and the gear and the recording gear all the way to how do you get it on iTunes, right? Like, you know.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's
a
whole thing in and of itself. The marketing of the marketing, and selling. I mean, that's if you get into that side of like, okay, I have a show and now I have inventory of shows that need sponsorship. Now all of a sudden you got to be the salesman too, on top of being a great host, on top of being your own webmaster, on top of, you know, audio equipment setup guy or girl. Like, you know, there's so many things that you need to be able to do. And even just having the equipment, like going back, like we were talking about, like 80, you know, getting to 70-80% of your audio quality, just to understand, to get that in the first place, like to do the research and to figure it out, like, it takes a lot. So, you know, we had a really great turnout, and a really great turnout of speakers. I think we had a really well-rounded day of some inspirational speakers, but also some the marketing side. Michael O'Neill with his whole talk on like how to be a better host, and I even found out stuff about that myself, on how to turn my own show a little bit on its head. Even though I've done 250 some episodes, it's time to adapt to some of these things that he was bringing up. So and even Tyler Roxon with his whole storytelling and turning into a more of a storytelling picture, picture framing things in a storytelling way. And Heather Ordover with her, like, I don't know if you've seen that talk, but it was really awesome. Like the cues that we can learn from people with that ADD, well, dealing with ADD or that ADD mindset of like everything, but the thing is like, if you cue your show with the right sounds at the right times, like it can make all the world of difference for people to like stay on top of listening to the show. Right. And following along. And I mean, but then again, that's more editing. That takes more time.
Right. Well, I mean, and there are also like these little things like, I'm looking at my notes here because there was one note where it was like, oh yeah, when you're introducing someone, like the last two words of the introduction should be the person's name. Like you don't start with the person's name, you introduce them, and the last two words of the introduction are their name. So you lead up to that. I mean, just these little things that I think, sort of like, as you mentioned, sort of like the broadcaster, like the journalist who was trained to do this and knows how to do these interviews. Like we're all just trying to figure it out as we go along. And then you talk to journalists whose job it is to do these interviews and do these professional interviews. They're trained in how to do it, and a lot of us are just trying to figure it out. And so some of those sorts of strategies and techniques I thought were fascinating to learn about. Yeah.
So one of our Facebook Live viewers. That's viewers. Yeah, viewers. He has a question. Is there a point where you become too wrapped up in making the perfect episode?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's. Well, yeah, I think so. I tell my guests when we record that and I'm not doing live shows, but I do say if you're talking about something and you want to stop, feel free to just stop, take a breath, and we'll just cut it out. But yeah, I mean, I think anytime sometimes interviewees are just not great. Sometimes I've done interviews where I'm like, this is like pulling teeth, and those are the times where I'm like, man, I wish I was a professional and I knew, what are the professional journalists? How do they really get a person who's kind of not a great interview? How do they get them to really open up and out there? So, and those are times where I kind of feel like where I'm pushing and it sort of backfires a little bit. So I think there is a lot of times where it's like, I'm worried too much about the sound quality, and I'm worried too much about getting just that right question, where really, if I just backed off and I said, okay, I have my list of topics or concepts or even questions that I want to go through. If I just sort of backed off and had more of a conversation, it might end up being a better show, right? Like sometimes less structure ends up being better. And I did an interview 2 days ago where the person I was in, usually I'll ask the person like, do you have a project that's coming out? Do you have a thing that you want to not necessarily promote as a like salesy way, but like, do you have a big project that's coming that you want to talk about? That, that can be a thing. And this particular guest was like, no, not really. We have something out in January, but and so we ended up sort of talking about 15, 20 minutes before we started recording. I was just like, all right, well, let's just talk about this thing that we've been talking about. Let's just record it. And honestly, it was like ended up being like a 30, 35-minute episode. And it was like just a great conversation. And so we ended up having less structure and I think like a much, much better episode because it just was more natural. So, that doesn't always work, but I find in those times where you just have, maybe it's just a better rapport with the guest. I find sometimes having less structure of saying, I want to make sure I hit these 5 questions and get this person to touch on these 5 things, where it's just like, let's just have a conversation. Those sometimes end up being just better. And not overshooting so much, not worrying so much about, getting rid of all the ums and the uhs and, the dead space or the sound quality is not perfect. Not really worrying about that. Like you said, it's really about the content. Get the content to be really good. And that's what people are listening for. I'm not being supported by NBC News or anything, right? Like this isn't an ESPN podcast. So people are tuning in because they want to learn something. Not that they don't want to learn from NBC or ESPN, right? But like those shows have millions of dollars of production quality behind them, and I don't have that. So if people are listening to my show, it's because they want to learn something. And so I think I always try to come back to that, to be like, don't get hung up too much on all these little quibbles and details and little things that maybe I should or should not have done, where instead people are listening because they feel like they're going to learn something from this guest, and that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I would agree. I think early on I felt that way. I was like, oh, if I edit my guests and make them sound really, really smart, I take out all their ums and all their uhs and their pauses that are more than like 1 second long, and all that. If I do all that, maybe they'll really think that this is an awesome show and they'll share it out, and it'll be it didn't work out that way. Now I don't edit at all. Aside from like if there was like a breakup in the audio or something bad like really happens, or like the dogs start barking and they have to like go answer the door, then I'll pause it and I'll just make like a time stamp note and I'll just edit that. But by and large I don't edit at all anymore mostly because I don't have time with our new daughter. So it's and the thing is like it doesn't really matter if the show, if you're creating a show and it's 30 minutes long and you're like, I'm going to take out all the ums and all the pauses, and the show becomes 27 minutes or 27 and a half minutes long. What did you really save? You wasted probably at least an hour editing that half hour to save somebody less than 3 minutes, when they very well might just be listening at 1.5x or even 2x when they're playing it back. So what are we really talking about? Now, if you have a show that's like an hour long and you take out all the ums and the pauses and it comes down to like 35 minutes, then you need to like practice some more and get better at what you're doing, or get better at guests. And that's one of the things I've noticed is my guests have gotten better as I've gone along, and I've gotten better. Because I went from like I was editing my guests more to I was editing me more, to the point where I grew as a host, I grew as a podcaster, as a quote unquote broadcaster, and now I don't feel the need to edit, regardless if I say like 4 times Now I try not to. I try not to say that.
Try not to do that.
Right. But the thing is it happens, and that's part of the whole conversation thing. And that's where, even if you listen to I listen to sports talk radio because I live in Philly and we're a big sports town, all day. And what I notice, they say all the time. And they do things that it's like, and the other thing that's important that you can learn from that is with the talk radio is people are calling in from their cell phones. So they might have the best broadcast. I mean, they're probably either using this mic or a Electro, whatever it's called, RE20 or something to that effect. And that's awesome, except for the fact that when they have callers calling on the show, they're using the cell phone, and they might be coming in and out of service. So remember that these $30 billion companies, CBS, with their talk radio station that's on FM, not even on AM anymore, they have problems like these callers that are calling in with a cell phone.
No, that's absolutely right. And even for those of us who are doing podcasting like this, you do an interview with someone over Skype. Like right now, I'm using my blue Snowball here at work. But most people I interview, they're using their Apple the mic on their Apple headphones, or they're just using the computer mic. So as much as we as podcasters are getting the gear getting fancier and fancier and fancier, that's only one half of it. And if your guest is sitting in a room in the middle of their office, and they have an open office and they're using just the mic on the computer, there's only so much you can do with that, right? And that's just the way it is. And so so I think focusing on the content is going to be the most important thing. And I think also making the guests comfortable that I try to there are some guests that I have that are not nervous in terms of being on a show. They're nervous, I think, especially the data journalists, that they think they're going to be burned for something, like they did something wrong. And I always try to tell them, look, again, this is my tag is like lazy man's blogging. I'm not here to burn you. I'm not here to try to bury you and show that you did something wrong. People just want to learn behind the scenes or how you think about this or how you approach this thing. So to make the guests sort of comfortable and realize that this is in some ways an educational discussion we're having, I think tries to put people at ease a little bit. But yeah, like you said, you can only do so much with if you have a guest and that guest is coming to you from Skype or from wherever. I once did one. I interviewed a couple people at Google, and they were not allowed to use Skype, and we did it on Google Chat, and the recording was just horrible. I mean, they were in like a conference call room, like the phone was in the center, and it just didn't work. And we had to throw the episode away. Just the sound was that bad. But and when I told them, they were like, "That's okay. We didn't like the way we came off when we were talking anyway." So it's sometimes you just win some and you lose some, I guess is where it comes down.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, again, you have to get to somewhere where it's not making people's ears bleed.
Yeah.
So there's a happy medium to be found, but you don't have to necessarily send people a mic and then have to run tech support for an hour before that if they don't know what they're doing. And in some cases, like I've done interviews with I don't know, I wouldn't say celebrities, but people that I'm not going to be able to get again. Like if the recording went wrong, like they're probably not going to do this again. So you just have to roll. Like if they're going to do it on a landline or they're going to do it on a cell phone, like you just roll with the punches and go with it, because you're on their time, not the other way around.
That's
when
right.
it comes to
that's right.
like it depends on what level they're at versus you're at, but
that's right.
But it's important to remember, be cognizant of that. So before we share how people can connect with you online and get your podcast and everything, Jon, is there anything you'd like to share that any other takeaways that you had from the conference and why people should look at coming to 2017, which is September 8th and 9th of September 17th here in South Jersey, Philadelphia area.
Like, what is that, 330 days away already?
I know, man. I know. Well, hey, you know, as a podcaster, I run the show. I was the host. I'm the equipment guy. I'm the sound guy. I was at the registration table, website guy, this podcast guy, like everything except I have like couple volunteers here and there, but so it's just like the podcast #podcast life.
Right. So I, like I said, this was my first podcasting conference, and I'm just flipping through my notebook here. I took a ton of notes. And like you said, Joe, there's so many aspects to developing and publishing a good podcast that goes beyond a good microphone or goes beyond a good logo. There's the marketing. There is the gear. There is how to be a good interviewer. There is how to write a good blog. There is how to get it. What are the platforms and how do you get it on all those platforms? It's not just iTunes. I mean, now, it's iTunes and it's Stitcher and it's Google Play and it's, there's just so many, and it's hard to keep up with all of those. And so, just hearing from people who do this either as a hobby, which I think, I don't know. So I would guess a lot of people in the room were doing the podcasting as a hobby-ish, not their core job. And then there's a few people who are doing it as their job or as a primary part of their job. And so if you are a podcasting or you're trying to launch a podcast where it's it's a part of your job, or it's just a hobby, you're just interested in talking about TV shows that you watch or whatever it is, that there's a lot of aspects to building a listener base that you can learn at this type of conference. I'd say the other, so two other things, I guess. The other, like, I was just thinking about like little things that I learned at the conference that I had not figured out. So, someone had said when you're interviewing on Skype, and I tend to turn my video off, right? Because I'll call someone, we'll have a chat beforehand, I'll turn the video off. What was interesting is someone said that if you call via just on the phone line, you end up in a bit, I guess, what would be, I guess, a wider bandwidth channel, and so the quality can be a little bit better. And so the speaker was talking about this, said, if you want to have the video interaction before you record, that's great, do that, then hang up and call them back just via the phone, because then you're in a different, Skype puts you in a different channel. I thought those, like, there were these little nuggets throughout the conference that were like, oh man, that's genius. Like, that's the night. Now I do that. I totally do that now. We're going to talk on video for a little bit. We're going to record. I'm going to hang up. I'm going to call you right back. I'm going to call you through the phone line. It's just that. And the other thing I'd say is that, and this came through a lot, I think, at this year's conference, is that people get a little obsessed with their numbers, obsessed with, how many downloads do they get. I know that's important because, sponsors want a lot of listeners. And I guess there were two things that came out of the conference. One that I had already that I think about a lot, which is, it's not necessarily, you may not necessarily want 5,000 listeners. You may just want the right 5 listeners, right? And it's about getting the right listeners. And the other thing is that it doesn't matter what you want to talk about. If you have something to add and it's interesting, then people are going to listen to it. And so don't worry so much about your numbers. If you're going to talk about your favorite cars, like right now everybody's sort of focused on the election, right? Let's just say, for example, but if your hobby is cars, lots of people are interested in cars. And so that's okay to do a podcast on cars and not on Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, right? If you want to do a podcast on your favorite mugs, if it's going to be interesting to people and and there are other people who are interested in that, then you build your own little community around this. And I have found with my podcast that there's a community. I'm not getting hundreds of thousands of downloads, but the people that I have a consistent listener base, and those people come in and they listen every week, and they get back to me, and the engagement is great. So that's another thing to sort of think about for those who haven't developed or are continually developing their show is, as long as you're developing something that's interesting and people are going to be interested in what you're talking about, you're adding value to something, then one of the messages I think that came through at the conference was, don't worry about your downloads. Don't worry about how many hits you get. That will come over time if you are doing something interesting and providing value to people.
Yeah, I would agree. Hey, if you had 5 people listening, but just one or all 5 of those people were like a celebrity that you look up to,
right?
Would you really care that you don't have hundreds of
you're doing a policy, for me, right? I would gladly trade off 5,000 listeners for 5 senators from U.S. Congress that were listening about the episode on student loans. That's gold right there. 5 senators, that's it. That's all I care about, right? That's the golden nugget, I guess. Right. But whatever. But it's not always about having thousands of listeners. It just may be about having the right listeners. So
yes, and the right listeners will come, and those people will share, over time, and that's how you'll grow. It's not a sprint; it's a marathon, and I learned very quickly. I've been doing this 2.5 years now, and I learned within the first 2 months that this wasn't gonna be oh man, start a podcast.
All right.
Here's my sack of money. Thanks, internet. I appreciate that. No, it's not. And that's okay. Because it doesn't need to be that way as long as you're utilizing it to the with the right target audience, with the right targeted people that are for you. You know what I mean? That you're trying to hit. And sometimes it's not always the people that we think we're gonna have. I'm drawing a blank on the name, and I feel really bad that I'm drawing a blank on the name. But anyway, you think that your target audience is going to be X, and it ends up being Y, and that's okay as long as you recognize it and makes that adjustment to be like, okay, this is where we're going to go from here.
Yep.
So, John, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'll just say one other thing on this. So there's another sort of data visualization podcast out there. And I'm good friends with the guys who run it, and I know they've been doing this a lot longer than I have, and they have they have a much wider, larger audience than I have. And I was talking to him, I said, how do I get this audience? How do I move from where I am up to where you guys are? And he said, don't worry about it. He said, they'll just come, just keep doing your show, and if you enjoy it, and just then keep doing it, and the listeners will just come. And so. I think, like you said, you sort of think that you're going to launch this thing, and all of a sudden the people are going to be dropping money in your lap. That's just not necessarily the way it is. So I would back to the person who wrote in that question about are there things that you're overthinking or trying to be maybe too perfect on? This is another thing of not worrying necessarily about getting tens of thousands of listeners for your first episode. About building up that user base or that listener base so that you have maybe your core group, and then it expands out, right? And it expands out, and you get, over time you get more and more. And as long as you're enjoying it, I think, for me, like if I wasn't enjoying doing it, I would just stop, because I'm not making any real money on it. It's not a core part of my, my day-to-day job, but I really enjoy doing it. I enjoy talking to really cool, smart people doing interesting things, and once that wasn't fun anymore, if that was not to be fun anymore, I just wouldn't do it anymore, right? And I even said, like, my initial plan for my podcast was to go every other week. That was the plan, every other week. And when I started last April, I was like, okay, well, I have all these lined up, so I did like every week for like 6 weeks. And then I just had more people starting to email and be like, hey, would you like to talk about this? And then I went like every week. And then for the next year, I went every week. And then I took a break this summer in August. I didn't launch it. And I said, when I come back, it'll just be every other week. I'm going to try to slow it down a little bit. But there's just so many cool people to talk to, and it's like I'm back to every week again. And, the moment where it's like too much or it's not fun to do that, that's when I'll back off and say, okay, we're going to slow it down. But at the moment, it's just so much fun to do these sorts of things, have these conversations that, I'm still every other week, still pushing ahead,
Well, I sympathize with that. I was like, I'll just do once a week. And then it wasn't even the end of the first week before I was like, you know what? I have like 15 episodes recorded, and I have so many lined up going forward. And I was like, let's go 3 a week. And then within a month from launch, I was like, you know what? What's 2 more a week?
Right. Let's just
do it. Let's just go 5 a week. Why not? And but the thing is, but the truth of the matter is that's awesome that you do that and that you do it every week. But then you have a back catalog.
Yeah.
And people that are just finding you now are going to have like half-hour or 20-minute episodes or an hour-long episode to go back through over time. That it's like you don't necessarily need to release an episode every single day or even 3 times a week. No, again, that's only, in my opinion, once you get to like that 50 episodes, 60 episodes where it's like, okay, sure, there's going to be people that are listening throughout the time, like that have caught up already. But every time somebody new finds you, it's like, boom, there's a whole catalog of old episodes to watch. It doesn't have to be a daily show, unless it's like maybe news driven or something to that effect. So it's important to keep that in mind that like once you get there, somebody finds my show, there's 257 episodos. So it's going to be, and each episode is anywhere between a half hour and up to 2 hours. So it's a lot of content for people to pour through.
Right. And the other thing that you can do as the podcaster is you have this catalog. You can harken back to those other episodes, just because, you have an episode with, your favorite celebrity, let's just say, or someone, it was just a great episode and it was really fun. And even at the time, it was a really popular episode. 6 months later, you can always put out on social media, hey, don't forget, I, interviewed Joe Pardo's on the show.
Whoa.
Listen to this, right? Like, I mean that, I think the people who are really good at the marketing and the social media tend to do that a lot. like the Guy Kawasaki's of the world, are really good at saying, I'm going to put out a tweet on Thursday afternoon that's going to, maybe be the original tweet from an article I wrote 6 months ago. And I think we tend to, at least I tend to think this way sometimes, which is, I don't want to flood my Twitter network with repeating the same thing. But what you forget is not the tweets run past, the Facebook messages run past.
It's like a minute. So, every minute it's gone.
Every minute. And so not only has maybe your network not seen it, people in your network haven't seen it, you may have added new users and new followers or whatever. And so there's a whole new base out there where you can say, hey, don't forget to go back and listen to this show or read this blog that I wrote about this or whatever. So it doesn't always have to be like the here and now. It can also be, don't forget about episode 30 where I interviewed this person and, it was really cool and this is what we talked about. So another way I think to sort of think about the user base and to get them engaged, here and then in the past. So to use that catalog. So,
definitely. Yeah. There's like plugins with WordPress that you can do to like bring up those old episodes. Of course, you don't want to do it too much or too often. Yep. But because then you're just flooding people with like the same stuff over and over and over again. So it's hard to find that balance. And I'll be honest, It took me quite a while to find that balance of like, you know what? I can put out enough content that's new that I don't have to share an old episode every day, every third hour, every 5 hours or every 12 hours. It's because then what happens is like those old episodes were getting it wasn't running through the course of old episodes and like marking off the ones that it already shared. It would like, 3 days later, here's the same random episode again. And it's like, I don't want to share the same episode like twice in a week.
Right.
So,
what I was trying to do, and I sort of dropped the ball on this because I just didn't have the time, was to do a Throwback Thursday hashtag, which is like, put out a tweet on Thursday, be like, hey, go back, episode 20 was with Edward Tufte, go take a listen, and sort of have a little logo or a little, I tend to do these little images with the person's face and a quote from the show and sort of put that out. And I haven't been very good at doing that regularly, but it's the list of things to do is a mile long. So.
I know. It's tough. Well, I've been watching a ton of YouTube in the last 6 months, and they constantly specifically tech tubers, YouTubers that are all doing the reviewing tech products and stuff like that. They all harken back to their old episodes with their cue cards. They'll be like, if you want to know more about hyperthreading, you can check this video right here. And
right.
And it's like, oh, wow, like that stuff takes even more time to do. But you know what? It could drive up those views and then ultimately make more money because people don't necessarily know and they're not necessarily seeing it in the related episodes.
Right. That's right.
It just, it's like, specifically. The only problem with that is like, well, if you put it in the same at the right time, it might count as a YouTube view, and then now they're going to the other video, and that's going to count as a view, and hopefully they go back and finish the other episode. But is it? Yeah, the views is what you need.
That's right. Part. Well, the other thing is that these things get easier. The first time I know I do these little ads. Like I said, it's a little image of my guest with a quote, right? And the first 5 or 6 of them were just. I'm building it in Adobe Illustrator and, you're dropping this in and you're doing this thing and, and it takes a while to do, but, then it starts to get easier. You just learn how to just drop it in. Same thing with editing and writing the blog posts and getting the sponsor message on. Like, it just becomes easier, so I think a lot of, I don't know what you've experienced with other people who are just starting in podcasting, but I think in general, people get a little frustrated right away. They're like, oh, this takes me so long to do this thing. It's like, it takes you a lot of time now, but it's going to become easier. It's going to become more familiar, and you're just going to be able to drop it in. Like when I edit, my audio down and throw in the intro and outro music, could be a simple example. Doing that in GarageBand when I first started, I was like, wow, GarageBand's really hard. And now I'm just like, do done, right? Like, no big deal. So the stuff does get easier, I think. So if you're listening to this episode and you're sort of like frustrated or having a hard time when you're starting out, all this stuff does get easier.
Oh yeah, no, I'd agree. Like starting with that minimal viable product of things that you can do. Like you don't have to be doing the social media thing to like 11, and you don't have to be doing this to 11 and this to 11. Like you could
Right.
just start like okay, let's just focus on Facebook. We don't have to do Twitter,
Right.
Instagram,
No.
Pinterest.
Right.
Like
Focus
one
on one
thing,
thing.
get it
Yep.
really going really well, and then you can start to branch out to other things. You don't have to do all of it all at once,
Right.
and because you're going to get overwhelmed and you're going to want to quit. And I honestly don't blame you, because unless you're super driven or have a really long background in technology or audio specifically, even audio when it isn't necessarily enough, technology is really that driving force, in my opinion. Audio equipment's one thing that you can learn more about, but if you don't know how to work a computer very well, it's going to be that much harder, and you're going to get frustrated that much quicker and quit that much sooner, which is a shame, because there's people out there that probably identify with the message that you're trying to put out there, or have a passion for mugs, like some people, or like I see you got water bottles behind you, like 3 of them, and a can and a mug.
And a mug.
They're just like on display, or
No, they're just that's just where I hide them. Yeah.
They're not very well hidden.
No, they're not. Really
they're not winning
hidden.
any hide
They're
and seek
hidden from my
championships.
door. My door's over that way, so when you walk in, you can't really see.
Oh, see, okay.
No, I'll show you. The only other thing
You gotta get yourself a fridge in there, man.
Oh, well, yeah. I'll show you the only other thing that hold on. So the only other thing that I tend to have for people to see, like when they walk in my office, I have Lego business card holders.
Oh, that's
so those
awesome.
I have those sitting like right in the front of my desk. So those are my like little knickknacks that hang out in the front. So yeah, but no, you're right. If you don't know how to, when I started, I didn't know how to push anything to iTunes. I mean, I didn't know how to do any of this stuff, but you find a plugin like Podbean or Blueberry or any of these things, and it's really not that hard. But I will say, if you're in it for the long haul, and you want to put some money into it, or you can get a sponsor. I have someone who edits my audio for me. And I have found that to be just a worthwhile investment, right? And I have someone who does the voiceover for my sponsor message. Turns out to be my father-in-law, who is a journalist, or was a journalist when he was working. He's now retired. And so he just, does that for me. So like, tap into your existing networks and, find people who you can use and can help you. So, I found to invest some money in certain things, and but like, for some people it might be to hire someone to help with the social media or to help with the web development. There may be places where you're like, look, I just, I don't know enough how to do this, or I just want this one thing to be really, really good, and I'm willing to pay someone whatever it is, a few $100 or something to help me on this aspect. And that, that might be worth it for you. So,
it'll save you a lot of time. That's for sure.
I mean, time is money, right? And if it's going to take you, if it's going to take you 8 hours to edit an episode, if you really want to edit your episode, but it's going to take a professional an hour, think about that trade-off. That trade-off of spending some money on it, and it, it may be worth it. And that's kind of obviously a luxury when you have support, you have sponsors. That's a luxury where you can go now afford that. And like I said at the beginning, I didn't do that, right? Like for the first 20 episodes, I was doing everything myself. And then the show got a base, and I got a couple sponsors. I said, okay, I'm going to take the sponsor money, and I'm going to invest it right back into the show. And so the first thing I did was get someone to do the editing for me, the sound editing. So so there are ways to make your life a little bit easier.
Right, and to a certain extent, we have to remember that if this is a hobby, that hobbies cost money.
Right.
So even if it's not this, it's fishing. If it's not that, it's something else. You know what I mean? Like, hobbies cost money, so you can't be afraid to invest money in yourself and in your hobby, past just equipment. So, John, I would love for you to share how people can connect with you online and get your podcast and go from there.
Absolutely. So, like I said, the podcast is called the Policy Viz podcast. That's Policy, Policy, Viz, V-I-Z. And you can find the show and all the stuff I write about data visualization and presentation skills at my website, which is policyviz.com. And you can connect with me on Twitter at J Schwabish, which is J and then my last name. and also at PolicyViz on Twitter, but I tweet more from Jay Schwabish. And then the only little pitch I'll make is I have a book coming out in 3 or 4 weeks, I think.
Oh, wow.
On,
Congratulations.
thank you. On presentation design and skills for people who are working with data, who are presenting data. So I'll just leave that pitch there. But I'll be writing a lot more on my site about that and about those skills, and adding some more guests who are talking about those types of issues. So yeah, so I'm on PolicyViz, and I'll be looking forward to hearing from folks if they have thoughts and questions about the podcast.
Awesome. Yes, and congratulations. Big congratulations on getting your
sir.
book done, and look forward to having that out for you.
Thank you.
And so thank you so much for taking the time to come on the Mid-Atlantic Podcast Conference podcast. Again, Mid-Atlantic Podcast Conference 2017 is taking place September 8th and 9th in just outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And yeah, it's going to be a great time. It was a great time this year, and we're expecting a lot more people for next year and a lot more surprises and awesomeness to come. I mean, it's still early in the planning, but as you pointed out, John, there's only 300 and some days left, so I do need to start. Now, I'll probably start like sometime after the first of the year doing a lot of that stuff, but we'll get there. Thank you everyone for listening. Thanks for everybody watching on Facebook Live. We had tons of people in and out all this hour or so that we've been recording. So check us. It's midatlanticpodcast.com. Thanks again.